I mean,
I'm more going to speak like this.
Yeah,
so.
of course. I mean, I'm very disappointed. I mean, my mic is working, but I'm having to hunch in a way that my osteopath will be very upset about. So, I'm going to have to go back to her and tell her that develop has caused me neck problems. So, but that's the negative way to start the panel. But the positive way to start the panel is that we've got some fantastic people booked in to talk about the best of British and about the past 30 years of British gaming in time for Yuki's 30 Years of Play campaign, which is celebrating the past, present, and future of the video games industry because Yuki is 30 this year. Woo.
Although it used to be called Elspeth.
It did used to be called Elspeth, and I mean, to think that I even got any form of whoop in the audience for that makes me feel... For not whooping. Okay, I mean, that's obviously the correct thing, because if anyone has an opportunity to whoop and fails to take it, I just don't know what's wrong with your lives. But anyway, so I think the important thing to do is to kick off and start introducing people. So the first one to introduce is me. My name really is George Osborne. Yeah, there we go. I've been working in the industry for the past decade. I've worked as a journalist, worked as a PR person, and general freelance monkey. At the moment, I'm helping Yuki out with their 30 Years of Play campaign, and generally making a nuisance of myself. Who's going to go next? I'm going to go for Alex, and then we're going to go down. There we are.
Right, hi, I'm Alex Trowers. I'm in the very unusual position of being the baby on the panel, having only worked in the industry for 29 years. Started out at Bullfrog back in 1990 and worked on pretty much everything they did until Dungeon Keeper 2, sort of 98, 99. And then on and off over the last nearly 30 years, worked with this guy. In a great many places on a great many titles, some of which we even released.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Glenn Corpus. I was at Bullfrog from the very start, and I wasn't the first employee, but that doesn't really mean anything. And I worked on pretty much all of the Bullfrog games to one extent or another, notably Populous, which was the last game I did the graphics on, and the first game I coded on. And Magic Carpet and Dungeon Keeper and Powermonger but about 2/3 of them, and most of the others had little bits of my coding as well. And since then I've been in two companies where Alex was involved, and a bit of contracting and then a bit of indie stuff. And right now I'm just starting to do something, funnily enough, with Sean Cooper, who was also Bullfrog from very early days, and but we can't really talk about that yet, although I might anyway.
Okay.
Ooh.
And I'm Andrew Oliver. I'm not from Bullfrog. Most of you know that I've got a twin brother. Got in the industry a lot. I'm just going to show I'm old. So the first game written was '84, but most people know that we joined Codemasters as kind of the first people at Codemasters in '86. Good old Spectrum, Amstrad, Commodore 64 type stuff. 7 years there, set up. After that, interestingly enough, and I will bring it up because as we left Codemasters, we brought on an agent, Jackie Lyons. She went and got us some contracts. One of them was with Bullfrog, and so I personally converted Syndicate and Theme Park onto the Mega CD.
I didn't know that.
That was
cool.
fun. Bloody nightmare, actually. Yeah, that was a weird old thing.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So there you go. So I've done some Bullfrog stuff, but I've done quite a lot of stuff, to be fair, over the years. Then set up Blitz Games. I suppose that was an early... Well, it was called Interact Studios, which we renamed to Blitz Games. Ran that for 23 years. Sadly, that crashed and burned with a few cancelled contracts all at the same time. Sort of slightly perfect storm, or very unperfect for us. Set up a new company called Radiant Worlds. Made a game called Sky Saga, which was doing phenomenally well, but unfortunately didn't get published. But we ended up selling in the studio to Rebellion. So Rebellion Warwick was our studio, and we have been now released from contract, but all wonderfully amicable, and looking for next opportunity at the moment.
There we go. Well, I was asked to ask some interesting questions to you, but I was also told that asking you whether you would win in a fight between one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses did not count. So instead, I'm going to ask you about, let's talk about the first device. Let's talk about the first device that you made for, because you guys, no offense, we're pretty old now. You know, we're going back some time. And I think there are going to be plenty of people in here who are going to be wondering what it was like working on your first game and what that experience was like. So I'm going to throw that over at Andrew, because
I'll start the earliest chronological
exactly
order, so.
Ranking officer. There we are.
Okay, so I guess the first real one, ZX81 we tampered with, but with a glorious 1K of memory, there's really not much you can do. But a Dragon 32, which nobody has really heard of, but it was made by Mattel in Cardiff or Newport or something, Swansea. Yeah, actually proudly made in Swansea. Operating system by a little known company called Microsoft. They just popped up. I'd never heard of them before.
It was 6800, wasn't it?
And it was a weird, yeah.
Yeah, the 8-bit version of the 6800.
Yeah. But you know what? Nobody ever heard of it. It was sold as a toy, but it was colour, it had sprites, it had a really, really good basic. Microsoft seemed to actually be a company that knew what they were doing when they did software. And actually it helped us that there were no games because we just started making our own. And me and Philip, slightly competitive, wanted to try and see if we could make Pac-Man and Space Invaders and stuff. And actually you could do it in BASIC. Whereas you look across, at the same time our mates were getting Spectrums and Commodore 64s, and actually it was quite hard to do those because they just didn't have the same sort of BASIC, or they had really strange sprite configurations and stuff. So it really helped us that we'd bought a computer that nobody made games for because we made our own.
And you were able to just go in that direction. Alex, what got you going?
My first computer was a TI-994/A, which is
Texas Instruments.
Yeah, Texas Instruments. It was the classic case of never send your parents out to get you a thing without very explicit instructions, because all my friends had Spectrums or they all had C64s, and either of those would have been fine. But no, I ended up with this thing that you couldn't do anything with or play any games on or anything. But, ultimately I got a Spectrum, but my first proper, actually paid to do this job was on the Amiga. On the 16-bit when I joined Bullfrog, and and that was obviously much better than the Spectrum.
Yeah, so you had the console equivalent of Lee Carvalho's putting challenge from that episode of The Simpsons where Bart gets bought the wrong game by Marge at the end of it. But anyway, and Glenn as well. When you were starting out, fond memories of.
Well, the first computers I saw were Commodore PETs around the back of the science lab at school before they were even teaching it as a subject. That was like in 1980. And I bought a ZX81 from the first advert and ran out of memory in the first hour of using it because 1K of memory, 768 bytes of screen, you're literally got 200 odd bytes left for your basic program. Yeah. So I ordered a 16K RAM pack from the second thing, and I kind of played around with making little bits of game. I actually had an assembler on the ZX81. Yeah. I remember going off to a ZX Microfair with £5 to buy an assembler, and another £5 that I'd got off of the head of geography at my school to buy the disassembler so we could swap pirate the software. Yeah. But the first, I didn't start writing. Then I had a Computers Lynx, which is worse than the Texas in terms of anyone being interested. Never did anything for it. Then I got an Amstrad CPC, and both of those old Z80 machines I was sort of playing around with, getting graphics moving around the screen, but I never had the nerve to think I could actually write a game. It was only when I started working at Bullfrog that I realised that I probably did know everything I needed to know to write a game.
You had a job there. So
yeah, well, yeah. Well, exactly. No.
Yeah, but he was hired as an
artist. I don't know what I'm doing, but I got a job.
But I was an artist, and I was the one designing the collision systems and stuff. Because
and believe me, there were some artists at Bullfrog who didn't know how to turn a computer on, let alone use it.
Well, you know what they say, fake it till you make it. You just got to get yourself into there, get your foot in the door. But so you're working with these devices, and one of the things that's really screaming out at me is limitations. So these devices are not particularly great. You have to work within what you've got available to them. How was that affecting you when you were going out and making your first games? What kind of decisions were you having to make when you were going off and making those titles for those devices?
I personally absolutely loved it. I miss those days because when you, like, small indies nowadays, it's like, even if they're working on a smartphone, it's like, well, where do you stop? There's virtually no constraints. But the limitations we had is like, right, 32K of memory or something, and I can only move around a few sprites around the screen of said size, otherwise it's all going to slow down, and I don't need to draw graphics particularly high res because I can't draw anyway, so hence why Dizzy and stuff looks a bit rubbish, because like, we didn't need to be artists. You can just bodge everything. So it was quite good. You could be a jack of all trades, but you didn't need to be a master of any, because it was actually, well, just a master of pulling it together, really. Just getting anything working was a miracle. So I actually loved that, and there was a real hacker's mentality of just getting something to generally pull together and work. Whereas that's a completely different thing now. It's proper artists, and proper programmers, and it's like, how deep do you want to go? Because frankly, you could just keep going now.
You could see the kind of the sea change in the industry occurred with the shift to PC and people actually starting to make their own PCs and stuff like that rather than buying the off-the-shelf numbers, where the concept of the minimum spec would turn up. And then just gradually, as machines had the capacity to get bigger and faster and be completely like user-defined about how powerful they were going to be, developers got lazier and lazier about optimizing for the little guy. The little one. Normally they would just build for this one standard, and that would be it. And either fit or it didn't fit. You would make it fit, and you do clever things to make it fit. And after a while, you just realise that actually we'll just tell them to get a better PC. Yeah. You know.
And you just basically just pass the problem down to them.
Exactly.
That's the pro-consumer move.
Lossy, right? 'Cause when I did the conversion from Theme Park and Syndicate from the PC, because
that's not our fault, right?
No, but I did the PC version. I had to take it across to the Mega Drive. It was massive and lossy, and it was written. It had all these different drivers. And so when I was passed all the discs, I said, "Can I have the original source code?" So I had all these PC sort of floppy disks or something, and I just remember like going through all the files, and they were massive. And some of it was written in C, some of it was written in assembler. There were bits and pieces all plugged together. There were different sound drivers for things. There were some different graphic cards, and it was just like, oh my god! And I'm
wasn't
thinking,
it based on the Amiga version?
no, well, no.
Maybe that was. That probably wasn't.
Maybe I should have done.
No, I'll tell you what, it probably wasn't ready in time.
That was a
port too.
Thinking, what a bloody mess. It's all just a big pickle or whatever. And I like the first week or so, I was like, oh my god, where do you start? Because you've got to cram it down onto a cartridge and then a CD. And the CD, just put a load of FMV or video. I don't know why we called it FMV.
Full motion video, wasn't it?
Because it moved.
Because it moved.
But ironically,
and that was new, and no one knew how that worked.
But video is when it is full motion video, because it is full video, whereas FMV always meant it's trying to be video, but it's not.
I think
It was letterboxed or steppy or
it's
whatever.
an easier buzzword for...
It was weird.
Yeah.
Like I can remember
It meant not full motion video.
It actually did.
Can you remember the MPEG guys coming round and giving us a demo of this new thing that enabled us to actually play video without it using up all of your memory? Do you remember that? The first research park office.
I can remember things
and it was
like
this tiny little thing in the middle of the screen, but it moved and didn't actually take up that much memory.
I can remember Populous 2 having an animation player in it that was just playing the flick files out of Deluxe Paint.
Yeah, Sean wrote a thing.
And the trick for that was to make sure that not too much of the screen changed.
Yeah, Sean wrote a thing that just did
Like
the
a
differences
GIF,
stuff.
really.
Yeah, but you could do. We had effectively had like multiple animations running at once by making sure that only the changes didn't overlap. You know, which is kind of cool because you could do stuff that.
It was good because you could get them out of sync. You could have. They didn't all have to loop to the same number of frames or anything like that.
How would you do that now?
It's a very good. It's a good question, but
People don't care about those things now.
Exactly.
You just do it in engine in real time now.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to dive in and ask about what the impact of those limitations were in terms of you as actual game designers as well. Because you had the technical limitations in terms of actually executing it, but then in terms of actually physically making the games, you had to work within those constraints and those contexts. What inspiration did that have on you?
You don't get game design. You don't get a game without constraints. No. Otherwise, if you remove the constraints from something, you've got a toy, you've got a toolbox, you've got a sandbox, you've got whatever. If you can do anything with everything, then, and that's valid, that's fun, that's cool. But you're not going to get a game. It's like if you look at golf, the game is put this ball in the hole. Yeah. If the hole was 50 foot wide, then you could throw the ball in almost any direction, it will go in the hole. But no, the fact is the hole is this big, it's 500 yards that way, and you can only hit the ball with a stick. And those are constraints, but that's why it makes it, for some people, fun. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, for some people, I mean, not for everyone. Golf is a bit of an acquired taste nowadays, but I think
it's a windmill. That's why.
Well, exactly. Yeah, the tiny windmills, they are fantastic. But it's a really interesting point because I want to tie actually in something that Andrew was mentioning, where he was saying, well, when you're working on games, especially on exceptionally limited technology, the constraints are naturally found from the tech, and that is the kind of thing that fences you in. But then what happens over the course of the industry and as it develops over the last few decades, you've just seen those constraints start evaporating. I mean, I can remember, I'm much more of a sort of a spring chicken in comparison to you gentlemen, I hope you don't mind me saying. But I can remember when people were talking about the Samsung Galaxy Free phone having the sort of equivalent power of a PS2, and the kinds of things and what that changes to people. So in this new modern age where you've got the tech and you can pretty much theoretically do what you want, even though obviously there are other constraints elsewhere. How are developers now ensuring that they're putting those constraints in themselves? And who do you think is doing that really effectively at the moment? Banjax, you're there.
Yeah, I'm going to slightly rewind and then sort of answer the question, because we had this constraint. So if I take something like Dizzy, we wanted to make a platform game that wasn't just pixel-perfect jumping, okay? But at that point, gameplay in a platform game was just about jumping, but we thought, no, we'll make some puzzle solving. And there'd been a couple of games around that was like, pick up the key, take it to the door. Oh, that's key number 3, that's door number 3. And we thought, you can make it more colourful than that. You want to add a bit of story, and why don't we make little tiny graphics which are different things and they're not just keys. So we'll have a pair of scissors to cut some string. It was always key and door puzzles, but it was very, very limited. But the irony is, you do a memory map of 32K, and then we want to have little speech bubbles to sort of explain what the thing was. So he threw the bucket of water over the fire. And very quickly, you're going, right, we've got 4K of memory for dialogue, right? Now actually, you work it out, like 4,000 characters, and it's like, so we were trying to sort of say that there's a big world and a big story, but you're actually saying, right, and we've got a few thousand characters in which to say it. It was a ridiculous constraint, and we're trying all sorts of tricks to do it. But one of the things that it forced us into doing, which I think was a really good thing, was we deliberately did stories of familiarity. So we picked on things like Jack and the Beanstalk or Cinderella or Snow White things, because if we don't have time to explain any backstory, then if we just go, well, it's a beanstalk and it goes to the clouds, everyone's got the backstory. Yep. But actually what we found is people love familiarity and they don't need it spelled out to them. You don't need to say, oh, by the way, there's probably a giant up there with a goose and there's a golden egg. You didn't need to say any of that. And it ended up being the shorthand of familiarity was, I think, one of the things that actually made it very popular because people felt familiar with it. I mean, years later, we nearly ended up with the rights to Shrek. Yeah. And I kind of almost think it would have been fun to have done Shrek because it was the same sort of thing. People love that familiarity, but then taking a different story through what you know from your childhood, sort of things you grew up with.
And so, but let's just imagine though that you were actually starting out today. Like, let's just imagine. Let's imagine you've gone into a little time machine or whatever, and you've gone back and come to the future, and you've come to here. I mean,
I'd get a webcam. I'd be a YouTuber.
Well, it might be a YouTuber, exactly. But I mean, as a designer, so one of the things there is that you were forced by the constraints to choose something, whereas now you're talking about that open-endedness. I mean, what kind of impact do you think that would have?
I don't really know what games are applying it now, but the story, the thing that epitomises this for me is, I mean, the whole reason that Populous, which was the first game that Bullfrog made any money out of, or because first there had been nothing. The whole reason that exists is because I was trying to convert a previous game to the Atari ST, and I just found out it couldn't horizontally scroll, so I got distracted into playing around with a bunch of isometric blocks. I was actually trying to recreate a game called Spin Dizzy. From the block set. If you look at
Paul Shirley.
I finished Spin Dizzy and I met Paul Shirley outside a pub about 20 years ago and told him that I'd finished it, and he didn't believe me, but I did.
It was ridiculously hard.
Because that's getting slightly sidetracked. But I was just I had this block set that was like the Spin Dizzy block set, and I thought, well, what use are they? I can draw them on the screen, but what am I going to do with them? So. Because I didn't want to write an editor or anything, I just wrote this sort of landscape generator that joined the block sets together into a thing a bit like a landscape. And it looked nothing like a landscape. It looked like a bunch of intersecting pyramids. I mean, it does in the final game, really. Yeah. And I just wrote this tool to flatten bits of it out in the hope it would make it look a little bit like a landscape. Yeah. And it didn't really, but it was fun to do the clicking thing, and that was the basis of the game. It was entirely speculatively developed, and I don't know how you. And it was entirely based. It only happened because the ST couldn't horizontally scroll. But I don't know how you replicate that. Quite, it's difficult.
Well, I'm going to do.
We're trying at the moment. Yeah.
One of the examples that I always remember, talking to you about, there was a game in the late 80s, early 90s, Sentinel, the Sentinel.
Yeah. That's a perfect example.
And it's brilliant. It's a really good game, and it's all stemmed around this incredible 3D landscape, which nobody had really seen before, and you could move around the landscape, and you're trying to get up to the highest point to take out the Sentinel. That was the aim. But the thing is, you couldn't move around the landscape. You couldn't just walk over there because the way it rendered the landscape couldn't be done in real time. You had to basically draw a big picture of the landscape and then just pan it around. Yeah. So that was a constraint, and that formed the game now. And so if you want to look at a modern take on that, imagine taking, for instance, VR and doing a version of Sentinel in VR, which is a perfect platform for it, and suffers from exactly the same limitations.
Actually,
you can't move from here to there without jumping. No one solved the locomotion problem. But if you did something like Sentinel, which is a wonderful game to play, really, really good, such a good fit for that in the modern, using modern language.
Yeah, and I think as well, when you look at the modern industry and you say about that process of limitation, I mean, I think it will come quite nicely actually into another talking point, which is about the changing nature of the business of games, right? Because in a lot of companies, setting constraints when designing is something that they do to get themselves to a point where their business can work. So with mobile free-to-play, there's obviously everything like this explosion from like the Voodoos and the Ketchups. They're hyper-casual stuff where they have these simple mechanics which they try out. If they work, they get it to market, off it goes. You have the Supercells going out and killing all game concepts that don't go out and succeed, that they come up with that idea and work. And then with a lot of independent developers, especially amongst the ones who are really successful, if you see things like Cultist Simulator, for example, where what they did... Exactly. I mean, won an award last night, and when you go and read their development blog, because they practice open development, they talk about the fact that they knew they had, in terms of their limitations, it wasn't the technology, it was the time and the budget.
The resources.
Exactly. Yeah. They knew that they only had enough money for a certain period of time to make this game, so they had to choose a concept that fitted with something they wanted to do, pick an art style and a theme that would really fit and resonate around that, and go for it.
I mean, the constraints have changed. There used to be... to do with the amount of memory and the amount of graphics and what you can do. But actually, there's big constraints now. The obvious constraint is, some people think it's the constraint of the talent that's in the team. No, it's the time you've got and the breadth you've got, but also it's making it for the audience. Frankly, if we got anything out in the early days, if you could get it in the shops, it would kind of sell. Whereas we know that that's just not an issue now. I'm sure everyone can get anything out. So how can you make it stand up? And the biggest constraint that every single person should think about is, what will people pay money for? Like, design that. Design the thing that if somebody will actually pay money for. Because I see too many indies like making games of a sort of genre that they like with a slightly different spin on it. And you just go, well, yeah, everyone will generally think it's okay. But there's so much stuff that is generally okay that nobody actually will pay money for it. Whereas if you do something drastically different, where 99% of your audience go, nah, it's rubbish, but 1% of your audience says, that's absolutely brilliant. So I was talking to someone yesterday in the bar who was talking about a zombie musical. And I was just like, that's so bizarre. Like, you're working on a zombie musical. And it's like, I imagine that most people will go, well, what the fuck? That's really weird. Like, to actually put on a musical and think that could ever get to the West End. But then you're thinking, but actually, there is a subset of the market going, I would pay for that. That would be so sort of like different.
And I mean, if you think about musicals, I mean, what's been the biggest musical of the last 5 years? It's about an American founding father that wasn't the popular American founding father. And Lin-Manuel Miranda, when he went off writing Hamilton, he was laughed at when he first performed a song from Hamilton at a White House ball. Like, literally, people were laughing because they thought it was a joke. And then 10 years later, well, he's doing pretty much everything possible now. But I appreciate that's off on the game, that's away from the game side. But I think the point about markets is it's really important. If you think there are billions and billions of players in the world, if you look at research, it is, essentially half of the world's population are playing video games. But if you look at the figures from like PC Gamer when they were looking through the Steam Spy stats last year, where they were saying in the course of a single year there had been more games released than in the entire decade between 2006 and 2016, you need to find a way to sell into that market. And so that goes into talking constraints.
So right at the beginning, so Codemasters had a little thing with their cassette boxes, and it was like the 3 second, 3 minute rule or something. And within 3 seconds, you had to sort of like, the picture on the box goes, ooh, that's different, that's interesting, so that you'd pick up the box. Was it 30 seconds, you'd look at the back, the screenshots, and you'd read a one-line
Oh,
text.
sorry, boxes with these things in shops.
Right?
And games used to be in these boxes.
And then the 3 minutes,
three-dimensional
hold your attention for 3 minutes, because that's how long it will take you to get to the till.
Yeah.
So that as you're sort of in the queue in the till, you're still looking at it and and you finish the purchase. And they had this thing, whereas now, I mean, I've said zombie musical. I've summed up an entire experience in 2 words. But we do live in this very, very shallow sort of audience where you've got to say, what is your game? Sum it up as short and punchy and uniquely as possible. And I think that does it. And it will do it for a certain audience. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, worked at Rebellion. They did Nancy Zombies. Yeah. That's 2 words. It's like, and you know what? It did all right.
So, like, yeah, I mean, like, I think...
There's probably a very large subset of the audience going, you can't do that. Yeah. And there's a certain subset of the audience going, bring it on.
Yeah. I think, like, again, the audience has changed. I think people have got, partly due to the fact that everything is so much more accessible, partly due to the fact that everything is just so much more saturated. They've got such a tiny window of time that they are prepared to devote to whatever you can do. So you have to hook them, and you have to hook them early doors. Yeah. To come back on your zombie musical thing, like EA used to operate this policy, like whenever you were making a game, their marketing department and their production department would always ask what the X is. Yeah. Now, every big studio has this kind of thing, and they all call it slightly different things. Like BlackRock used to call it the big idea bullseye, the design pillars, that kind of thing. But what the X was distilling down what is this game, but you can't use more than 1 sentence, and you have to explain everything about the game in that 1 sentence. Yeah. And if you can't do that, then you've lost them. You've lost them already. And I can remember being introduced to that and thinking, look, this is crap. I want to tell you about all of the really cool stuff in the game and how it works and da-da-da-da. And 1 sentence is too much. But it's an amazing design exercise that, again, all constraints, they focus you in on what it is that you need to do and how you need to communicate that. And this is just a way of doing it at the pitch level. Yeah. And so if you can come up with an X, you're going to be in a much better position to actually follow through on that and actually produce a thing at the end of it, I think. Yeah. And so I've come 180 degrees on the X. I think the X is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, Glenn, I'm interested to hear what you think.
Well, it's in it. I mean, I'm the wrong person to ask about this because I'm usually on
Good work, George.
Stuck in little technical, no worries. In little technical places and stuff. But it reminds me very much of a game that me and Alex worked on. It was released in about 2002, a thing called Battle Engine A Killer, which is, I think it's a great game. It has some pretty rapey videos and stuff.
Terrible dialogue.
Partly Alex's fault because he wrote it, but our big problem with that was it was this really cool game where it was almost like an RTS that played itself, but it was a first-person mech game where you were flying around in the middle of the action, swinging the battle, genuinely swinging the battle in favour of your side. And you could literally build a level, as developers, by just throwing all the stuff down and letting it play itself. Yeah. And that was all genuinely what we did. But it was all perfectly simulated. But the problem was, it came out just after Halo, and Halo had that as its storyline. And it didn't matter that it was. I mean, Halo was a brilliant game. Looked way better than I played better than I was just different, but it was a different sort of game. But all of that, really, it was sort of like playing Quake, but the corridors were replaced with a beach, and it wasn't. And their games their tanks looked better than ours, but they had 2 on a level, we had 50, and 300 soldiers as well, and so the game didn't really have an X that could sell because a much bigger game could just put that in the storyline and. It was equal to, you know what I mean? It's like, so we totally missed out on that.
Exactly. And I mean,
I'm just talking about how to get it wrong, really.
And there as well, like sort of Quake to Halo as well, sort of a nice instance about how sort of technical limitations stop limiting people, so it allows people to make design choices. Because Quake, I mean, if you get forced into corridor shooting, that produces a natural experience where you're in tight and close corridors, shotgun baby. I mean, that's what we're all looking for. But the whole point of Halo is those wide open spaces gave it room to develop, say, AI that thinks much more about things like flanking players. It starts becoming a more tactical, more strategic game. And so you start opening up. And at that time, that's great because you're unpicking and you're unpacking and you're getting more layers and you've got those opportunities before you. But then suddenly what happens is you get to this point where the canvas can be almost entirely blank. At which point then you have to go and hone in on those constraints and hone in on those limitations. So, I mean, as well, like we've danced around it a little bit, but in terms of like platforms themselves, how important have like the various different platforms been in shaping that debate around limitations? Because, the console wars, for example, or going back to PC, like we think about those sort of like almost in Halcyon terms now, but now we're getting to the era of cross-platform gaming, cloud gaming. What kind of impact did that have on you when you were out making games?
Well, you couldn't make Mario Kart Kart on a Mega Drive.
Yeah.
Licensing notwithstanding, just because the SNES had decided to do that one Mode 7
Yeah,
thing.
had the
Seven
one Mode
trick,
7
yeah.
And then
swingy-
suddenly there was a whole
F-Zero.
raft of games that kind of had to use that. Like F-Zero was impossible to play unless you were sat on a swivel chair, because it was brilliant, So, I mean, it's always been technical stuff as well. So again, part of the reason behind the Quake to Halo thing, all of those games, it was all built on how many polygons can we draw at any one time, and how many can we get away with not drawing. And just sticking everything in little dogleg corridors meant that you were never really drawing that much. So suddenly you get to Halo, and it's, here we go, here's a big world. And in a sense, they're just scaled up corridors, and it's still all crinkles, and you still can't do the let's draw everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the problem the industry has is these so-called dirty little secrets. Like there was that big thing a couple of years ago on frustum culling, and the great people on Twitter decided that we were filthy, disgusting cheats, and how dare we do that kind of thing. And everyone in the dev community is looking around going,
We had to.
you have to do this. Everyone does it. It's not, and it's kind of you never really want to see how the sausage is made kind of deal.
That's it, and but exactly. But it's one of those ridiculous things where it's like you have to do that, or otherwise you actually can't make the damn game. And I mean, but with platforms, I mean, if you think, especially if you think nowadays, talking about going back to indies and mechanical constraints, I think another great example of it that worked was when Reigns came out for the first time, and obviously the follow-up to that as well with the Reigns Game of Thrones, where I can remember interviewing the creator of it back in 2015, and he said he was using his phone and he wanted to create a game that could take the mechanic that Tinder used and essentially use that to make interesting choices. And so he decided, well, what I'm going to do is put it in the framework of a monarchy, and you're making yes/no decisions. It's like, do you go save the village or do you just let it go? And then it's bringing these meters up and down, and it sort of becomes this tale of how binary choices can lead to downfalls because you don't know what's going to happen. By making sort of a yes/no decision, it could impact you further down the line. That kind of decision's great. But so if we're moving into the modern era where consoles, I mean, Andrew, what do you make of this as well? Because you did a lot of work, especially like you were mentioning, in porting. If all of the same consoles are much of a muchness and the engines used to make games are, same unity across the board.
Back at Blitz, we did our engine and we'd make games of movies and things like that, and you were deliberately designing sort of around the visuals and the IP and making sure that it worked on everything. But I think what you do need to do is look at something far more unique and put the constraints on yourself. So what you see people doing at the moment on the Switch and the mobiles and stuff is giving it a weird art style or something, just to make it instantly stand out, because at least people have got, it instantly looks different. But then what you want to do is focus on a particular mechanic and say, my game is going to take that particular mechanic, I don't know, like a Monument Valley, which I absolutely love, and just go, we're just going to do that and iterate, and that puzzle mechanic can be used and extruded into more and more different levels.
Yeah.
And that is very cool, because you can go, it's looks stunning, it's unique, it's a simple concept, but it's got longevity and people will really kind of get into it. And you need to just see something like that. But it's very difficult to sort of keep coming up with unique ideas. Yeah. But that's what you've got to do. Whereas a lot of people just go, I don't know, I love Overcooked or something, let's do a game that's based roughly on that. It's like, well, there's millions of those now, and there's just clones and clones, and it's like, they're never unique. They're just always slightly different versions.
One of my pet hates for game designs to do with platform is somebody will come up with an idea and they've made a PC version of this platform or whatever. Brilliant. Okay, here's another Metroidvania. Okay, fine, that's good. And then they go, and we're going to put it on mobile.
Yeah.
And one of the constraints on mobile is, or tablet or anything, is we don't have a joypad. Yeah. Why are you making this game for something that doesn't have the control input that you're relying on? You have to build it for the thing.
So to spin it back at you then, so if you look at Google Stadia, if you look at Microsoft, what it's doing with its xCloud, if you look at the mock-up images, they've been deliberately showing, hey, look, it's Assassin's Creed Odyssey, but it's running on a smartphone. I mean, do you think that now that Stadia is starting to move into that direction, that the kind of peripherals that were originally being sold with smartphones, the sort of the controller things, is that going to become a thing? And therefore, is that going to?
And we'll put it this way: I think like part of the point of the Stadia thing, like you wouldn't want to have to buy a peripheral for your phone unless you knew you were going to get some use out of it. And if it's the same peripheral, if suddenly instead of buying a big console, all I have to buy is one peripheral, then to play loads and loads of games, then that's okay, that's absolutely fine. But there's nothing, right, so like whenever you're watching a film or something like that, and you see people who are playing a game, nominally playing a game, and they're holding the controller or they're holding it wrong, and it doesn't match up with what you're seeing on the screen, or it's not even for that platform, or it's not even plugged in, that's what I immediately thought of when you're saying, here's the marketing promo for here's something running on the smartphone. No, someone's photoshopped something on a smartphone and it doesn't go.
Exactly, yeah. It's about making sure that if it happens, it actually works. Yeah.
Well, one thing they have done, I mean, Apple have just announced that I'm pretty sure that iOS 13 is going to pair with Xbox and PlayStation controllers. I think the MFI joystick's down the toilet now, so that's one thing to make that more feasible.
Interesting.
If there's one constraint that I would really like to see removed, it's the kind of political barriers between the big players. The idea of crossplay to me is wonderful. I absolutely love that. Like we were working on Stunt Car Racer. We were working on a sequel to Stunt Car Racer, and we had it. All of the games that we used to build them multiplayer. It just was the way we worked. And we had this thing running on PC, on PlayStation 2, and on Xbox. And you could network all of them together and just play in the office on whatever platform you wanted in the same game. And there was no way we would have ever been able to release it with that feature in. But I don't see why, and it's purely political reasons why you can't do that. There's no technical reason why you can't do it.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the experience I can remember reading about with Psyonix. I mean, recently Psyonix became for Rocket League fully cross-platform, with the Rocket ID system. But it was about 3 years ago where they were asked, because you were able to play Steam with PS4, they had that crossover, but they were like, well, why can't we do PS4 with Xbox One players? And it's just like, well, we've got the functionality in there. I mean, it won't take as long to turn it on. We just can't because we're not allowed to.
Wasn't there a thing with Fortnite recently
where that was it? Like Fortnite, that's I mean.
But it was like banning accounts if you'd played with the same account on two different things. Like one of your accounts get locked.
One of the things that Epic have done really well with that is actually sort of smash the barriers down. They got the world's biggest game and they wanted it to be truly cross-platform. And so they essentially forced Sony into climbing down on that in the end and allowing cross-platform play between PS4 and other Fortnite accounts, because Sony realised that it's the world's most popular game, and if suddenly the people are saying, I'm not going to play it on PS4 because I can't play with my mates across.
So in
PC.
Summary, constraints are really good, except when they're really bad.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Make sure that you know which are the good constraints and the bad constraints, and it's really obvious to see which ones are which. But gentlemen, we are actually coming towards the end of our time, as we expected when we had our briefing call last week and said we could probably talk about this for hours, and they were right. But so I've got a little bit of a question for you before I throw out to the audience, and it's a little bit one to sort of look back retrospectively and give you a little bit of food for thought. So we often talk, I mean, especially during the 30 Years of Play campaign at the moment, we've been talking about a lot of the classic games that have come out of the British industry, everything from Rome Total War to Populous, all the way through, I don't know, to the more recent hits like Overcooked. But if there was a game that you played or you made in the past 30 years that you think didn't get enough credit, which game would it be? And would you like to put it...
I'm going to answer for Glenn, and I'm going to say Battle Engine.
Battle Engine for Glenn. And why Battle Engine not getting enough credit?
Because again, like you said, no one had heard of it.
Well, no, it was just a game that me and Alex happened to work on. I think it was possibly the best game I worked on, although actually trying to play it the other day, I sort of changed my mind about that. They had it at the Guildford Games Festival, and I couldn't remember. I was trying to play the first level, and it was like, well, I can't do anything. Oh yeah, I'm not allowed to shoot or fly until I've gone through the tutorial, which I can't hear. It was kind of embarrassing to sort of realise what people put up with 20 years ago that they wouldn't now. I mean, the first 5 seconds, the fact that anyone didn't just wander away with it.
That probably speaks again to the idea of like constraints. If you've got like a PlayStation controller, you've got 14 buttons, and there was a huge swathe of everybody deciding, what are we going to do with this button? Rather than, we want to be able to do this, what button can we put it on? We've got a spare button sitting there, let's use it. No, you don't need to. Exactly,
or even in a lot of games now where, again, we keep bringing up Overcooked, probably for a good reason, but if you think about Overcooked, it's essentially control stick, 2 buttons, and it's just like they choose to lean into that. So I'm going to say Populous, because not because I'm working on a spiritual successor or anything.
That was the bit you weren't supposed to say.
Exactly. Was that? But it's okay. It's all right, Andrew. Because I can see Andrew struggling.
Yeah, I am struggling. I can't think of one that is underrated. I mean, as you started the question, and it's like, what game have you played like loads that is underrated? I was like, because the game that I've played loads and I just think is unbelievable is Mario Kart. And it's one of those things where I just think in 30, 40 years' time, they will be bringing out Mario Karts, and people will love to sort of like look back 30 years and go, oh, I remember when Mario Kart looked like this.
Yeah.
I mean, we can almost do it now because we can look back almost 20 years or something
Yeah.
and go,
Yeah,
oh, I
you
remember
go
when
to
Mario
Mode
Kart
7.
looked like
Yeah.
that, into Mode 7. And it's just, that is unbelievable quality design and almost made timeless. And I can imagine there being, I don't know, Mario Kart 15 or 16, people go, oh wow, it's so refreshing. It will be pretty much the same, but it will have new levels. And
Well,
it
it's
will
the
be
familiarity
state-of-the-art.
thing, isn't it?
And it is.
They know
just-
what a mushroom
just
is,
go,
they know what a
it's
shell
always
is.
been there, and I just love the fact that there were some things, for us in TV and entertainment, The Simpsons, it will probably always be there,
Yeah.
and it will always be the same, and it's completely timeless. They never grow up. And I think, so I was thinking you were going down that way, but I can't honestly think of one that I've absolutely loved, that I'm sort of like the unique one that never really appreciated, like, that I appreciated it but didn't get its credit. I'm probably too popularist. I just go after what other people kind of like playing.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, the only one that I could think of, it's not even British, but it was a game called San Francisco Rush 2049
Oh,
on
not
N64,
bad.
which was a surprisingly tight race, nice sort of different options to get through each track, and it was a fantastic stunt mode as well, because for some reason in 2049, spoiler alert, the cars are going to have wings. It's going to be amazing. So you could go and pull your wings out and do something.
Hey, if you're going N64, I'm going to throw out Blast Corps. Amazing game.
Oh, yeah,
Blast
Blast
Corps.
Corps.
Now that's
Come on.
Oh, come
Let's
on,
get a
Blast
sequel.
Corps.
Imagine
Now
what you
that's-
could do today with none of those constraints of,
Yeah.
right, the buildings have to be boxes. Imagine what you could
Yeah,
do with
just
modern
smashing
physics and,
everything.
Exactly.
Just
Well,
smash
come on.
everything.
Well, to be totally honest, I bumped into someone from Rare yesterday, so I think I might just go and hunt them down and just say what's going
Oh
on.
no, I've been poking them with a stick. Come
Yeah,
on,
just- I was like,
we
come
need
on.
to petition Rare. We want a Blast Corps in 2020.
We want Blast Corps 2020. That's a campaign we can all get behind. Am I right? There we go. So, how many minutes? 4 minutes. There we go. I think you've got time for 2 questions. So, gentleman there, Chris.
Hi. So all of you have seen the UK games industry develop over the past 20 plus years. And you've mentioned the Guildford Games Festival earlier.
Yeah.
We're seeing Leamington Spa develop as a hub as well. How do you see smaller regions trying to enter this market? What do you see that they should be doing in order to actually turn not just West London or East Midlands into the games hub, but the whole of the UK?
There is a funny irony that you have conferences like this and we all meet up, and yet we all talk about everything online. I often thought, are there teleconferencing conferences where they all turn up and they all fly
Games
over
of
San
World.
Francisco?
Yeah, Rami's just done one, isn't
Yeah, okay. So I just think there's sort of, we all talk about everything can be online, and yet actually, we're humans. We want to actually meet face to face, and bringing people together to talk to, which does mean that these hubs where people can all get together actually really work, and you find all the little startups all coming. So I'm not going to, well, I'm going to end up promoting like Brighton or Leamington or Shoreditch or something, as if you want to do a little startup and you don't mind where you live, then if you want to do games, why don't you go into one of those? Even if you're doing the game on your own and you're using all your people remotely on the internet, the fact that you can go down the pub and thrash out ideas with people like-minded who are doing the same sort of things and start sort of bouncing ideas off people who actually know and care, that is actually really useful, because trying to do things, I mean, we actually, when we were back in the day, we were trying to get artists, as we started to use artists, we were trying to describe how they could draw the graphics, but we didn't have the internet, so we had a fax. So we'd sketch really crappy pictures, and we've got loads of these sort of things, and we'd fax it through to an artist, and then he would draw it in deep paint or something, deep paint I think it was, and send us a disc in the post. So it didn't take him a week to draw it, it just took a week to turn up in the post, because he couldn't send it back to us. And there were all sorts of weird things, whereas now everything is instant, and you can get on Skype, but at the end of the day, you do sort of need to just meet up, and these communities are incredibly powerful.
It's
communities.
definitely, and it's not just a case of having enough people in the right place. It's about doing the right stuff with them when you've got them. So about the time where like kind of Bullfrog was breaking up and Guildford was sort of fragmenting, and you Lost Toys and your Lionheads and your Muckyfoots, there was almost like an unspoken bond that goes against the kind of the corporate approach to things. In that if somebody came and interviewed with us, and we thought, hey, look, they're pretty good, but we've got nothing for them, we would, without telling them, just pass their CV on to the next guy and say, listen, we've got nothing for this person now, but they're really good, maybe you can use them.
Yeah.
And it's that idea of, we're not competing with you. You're making a game and we're making a game, but we're not your competition. If you succeed, then we're going to succeed as well. And that's the kind of mindset you need with your community.
So theoretically, so you're an indie and you're in a place that doesn't really make games, I don't know, Yeovil or something, and there's just no hub there or whatever, then you go, yes, but I can connect with anyone. But then you probably wouldn't. You would probably working in isolation. I mean, now me and Philip are sort of consultants, and a lot of companies just go, don't need consultants, we know what we're doing. And we walk in and we're going, oh my God. It's like we've walked into so many places going, you don't know what you don't know. And you have like walked into so many traps, sort of like a bad contract, or you're doing something in a stupid way, you've paid out for stuff you didn't need to pay out. I mean, there's just so many traps. But if you are on your own, you would call out, or you would Google, or you would search what you think you need. But if you're down the pub with mates who are making other games, you're going, I never really thought of that. Yeah. So therefore you would never have looked. But you will end up having conversations which go in a direction you didn't think. And you'll go,
like this panel.
Yeah, exactly. Just like this panel,
yeah,
exactly.
So, and I think that is incredibly powerful, because otherwise you will sit there in blissful ignorance, not knowing what you didn't know, even though you had access. You have access to all the knowledge in the world because you've got Google.
But you need to know.
But
you need to know what you need to find out of that.
Yeah.
You need constraints.
And you don't know what you do.
Limitation.
Don't-
Exactly.
The weird thing is, though, that it does actually get more and more possible to work remotely all the time. I mean, the thing I've been working on for the last 8 months has been entirely remotely, but weirdly, we're now looking at the sort of, when we do start going to full production, setting up a team somewhere, you know. Yeah. And funnily enough, it's
somewhere in the middle.
Not very far from. No, probably in Guildford.
That's it. And then just as one final point as well, I think that one question will be the one question we've got. But one of the things to think about now is local government and about what they can do to help you out in particular. Because I've done some stuff in terms of local government recently, just in terms of my spare time, actually helping out with some election campaigns and things like that. And things like district councils and county councils, they're always looking for ways to create new jobs. They're looking for ways to grow local enterprise, and they're looking for new industries to get on board with. And genuinely, district councils are exceptionally boring places. So if you turn up as the video games industry for your area, say, we've got this many jobs here, but we need support growing. Here is a funding bid that I'm going forwards, because they often have pots of money available for the local community, whether it's like area committees aimed at specific towns, whether it's regional development funds, whether it's anything like that. You can then go forwards, bid for that kind of cash and go and build things. And when we're talking about why I think that model works is because that's how Interactive Futures got its money. It was funded through the council. If you look at Guildford, it's funded through the council and something called the LEP, which is the Local Economic Partnership. So you've got, and actually that was the same thing as well with Interactive Futures. So it's one of the things that the video games industry is now at a size and of a certain prominence. The government has woken up to its potential to create jobs, and they know that those are high value knowledge economy jobs that are much more likely to stay around, because actually if you can create those jobs in that area and build a community, that's going to be great. So think about those kinds of things. But on that note, I just went on a very strange local government rant at the end of a video games panel. Could we please have a round of applause for the panelists, because they've been magnificent. There we go. Thank you. There we are.
Thank you.
Interesting.